Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to God's Grace on Thee and Angel Wallace Productions. Today is Monday. It is the 16th of December. It is of 2024, and it is now close to 8 o'clock a.m., about 7:52. And it is 36 degrees here in Reno, Nevada. It's cloudy, but the sun is shining. So today I want to get into Chapter 4 of the Phoenix Journals. And I know it's kind of cumbersome to continue to talk about the Jews, but when you think about it, they've already inundated all of our lives. So you have no choice but to address it. So let us continue. Chapter 5, Recording 1, Hatton. Monday, March 2nd, 1998, 7:35 a.m., year 11, day 198. Rabbi creates Jewish court, but the constitutional law, people cannot. I know, readers, just when you think you might be finished with Jewish stuff, here comes some more. The Constitutional Law Center had several major purposes when it was established, and before Mr. Green Anderson et al. Diverted the funds sent for that business, one of the major top-of-the-list programs to set forth was a court to provide arbitration for disputes that could be handled in a common court, a people's court, or any civil matter recognized out of the government's courts, a settlement by a panel, or a jury. Now, this would lessen the lengthy time consumed in the governmental courts and take away backlogs from those courts, along with cutting the expenses involved by incredible amounts. We couldn't get it done, and for our efforts, it seems we just got pounded on over and over again. And Mr. Dixon even had arranged a place where this court could be established right in Bakersfield, California, and people to run it. Have you ever been to Bakersfield, California? It's just nothing but dirt. If you blink, you missed it. Of course, it would be open to all citizens. So some observant readers sent the following. Los Angeles Times, Saturday, February 28, 1998, quoting H in the kill box. The sender has noted a nation within a nation, an official public notice. The Board of Rabbis creates the Jewish court. The Southern California Board of Rabbis has created its first Jewish court, or Beit Din, to provide arbitration of disputes within the region's Jewish community, the second largest in the nation, with about 500,000 members. The entity, which will offer an alternative to costly, often defensive civil court procedures, will be distinctive in the Los Angeles area, spokesman said, because its panels of 3 rabbis will be chosen from Reform, Reconstructionist, Conservative, and Orthodox clergy, and will serve claimants from all branches of Judaism. And in the kill box, Hatton states, the justice will, of course, be based on Talmudic law. And we know about that law already. That's where they allow everybody to rape everyone. Small kids, marry small children. Existing Jewish courts, both permanent and temporary, usually serve only their own wings of Judaism, said Rabbi Lawrence Goldmark, president of the Board of Rabbi. The board enthusiastically voted in November to form the court, he said. Now, this is important because it affirms our belief that there is one Jewish people, said Rabbi Aaron Kriegel, who proposed the idea. Jewish ethics are not divided by denominational lines, he said, and this will allow Los Angeles community to recognize our unity at a time when that unity is being challenged. In the kill box, guess what, though, readers? That unity is only being challenged within the various denominations of the very Jewish people they serve. And some of those Jews want out, and this will further restrict them to a bound and non-separation grouping. Now, Mr. Kreigel is not only senior rabbi of Temple Nerv Marav in Encino, but also an attorney. And acknowledging that certain disputes are too controversial within Judaism to resolve, Kreigel said that the court will not handle disagreements, for example, over kosher practices, religious conversions, and same-sex wedding ceremonies, but cases involving various business, medical, legal, and non-ritual religious issues will be accepted, he said. So the first case to come before the Beit Din will concern a dispute that Kreigel learned about early last year between an individual and a Jewish institution. So rather than go to civil courts, the parties decided to wait for the Board of Rabbis to form the Jewish judicial body, he said. Now each party will choose a rabbi for the Beit Din panel, then those two rabbis will select a third panelist from their own ranks, Kreigel said. And we should be rolling within 2 or 3 weeks, he said. Rabbi Paul Dubin, who recently retired as the longtime executive secretary of the Board of Rabbis, will serve as secretary of the new court. End of quote. So one comment about this that is apparent to everyone who has been caught in the trap of judges, attorneys, lawyers, yes, there is a difference, and any legal institution, is that what difference does it make? Everything in the judicial system is based on Jewish standards, from the Kol Nidre to the very Bar Association demands for the brotherhood. Yes, indeed, and there is no longer any suggestion or denial otherwise. And if you watched 60 Minutes last evening, you will have noticed a program on the new Russia in Moscow. It is based on the Beverly Hills, USA concept of money-changing, expensive duds and necessities, girlfriend-based marriages, sometimes boyfriend-based, and operates on such a commercial level as to require that the biggest single personal job is that of a bodyguard to those newly rich banditos. And one of the big money makers said he came over to America to take notes and lessons on how to run his big money business, and expected to meet people like J.P. Morgan, etc., and et al. He met nothing except lawyers, 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 and more lawyers, and never met any other business parties at all. The lawyers have taken over America, he said, and it is destroying America. And he continued, Russia will be the economy and growth nation to surpass all world focus in the next 10 years. If we don't allow the lawyers to eat us alive alike in the U.S., it was noted that all the business people and the lawyers are all Jewish. And just think, you guys out there object to our even sharing such as the protocols of Zion, which is a very outline of how to take a world. Good business? No, for good indicates goodness, and you have no goodness left in your big business. So we write for the ones who have inquiring minds and want to know. Quoting Part 18, Global Parasites. How the Jewish question touches the farm. So the real estate speculations of the Jews are familiar to all, but unfortunately do not constitute their entire land program. Now, many American cities have changed their characters entirely during the past 15 years by reason of Jewish speculation in residence property. And it is a fact established in the larger eastern cities that the recent exorbitant and extortionate rise in rents was largely a matter of the Jewish landlord. The governor of one of the most important of our commonwealth was loath to sign a bill regulating rents. And his hesitancy was encouraged by very heavy pressure brought to bear upon him by the weightiest Jewish financial interests in his own and neighboring states. And he finally decided that he would sign the bill and give the law effect. And the fact that decided him was his personal investigation and the investigation of his personal agents into hundreds of cases of abuse, where he discovered that it was a common practice among Jewish landlords to transfer the same piece of property round and round to every member of the family in turn, each transfer being the excuse for a new increase in the rent. And many have their eyes open to the Jewish question in various ways. This was the way a governor had his eyes opened. In the kill box, Hatton, let me point out something which they don't want you to know, readers. You wonder about the explosion and collapse of the market? The market is nothing except a clue line of manipulation. You are headed for a deflationary depression, but you will note rents and prices remain high, and we're seeing that, right? And they will remain high until the market manipulators get all their ducks in a row and then collapse the market. But nobody will be able to pay for things, so foreclosures by government on tax delinquency and mortgage arrears will be the thing of the day. Now, you might think that these disaster loans are helping you. No. The bigger the money owner, the bigger the loan, which is quite obvious, for much more land and property is damaged for these independent growers. But how are those loans based? Well, they're based on the lending value the banks wish to set for the property, not the government. The migrant farmer's little house will merit only a pittance, which of course will have to be written off later. But when those payments come due, foreclosure on massive amounts of acreage by large farming operations, dairy farmers, cattle raisers, etc., will be basically confiscated and into the pockets of the Jewish landlords they go. You don't own anything, folks. Even that land that your home sits on, you don't own shit. So much land in these lowland areas, which are flooded once every 300 years, will be marked condemned as wetlands and taken out of use in private holdings. Except for the bankers, of course. The plan takes all lands that had any standing water at all, even after 53 inches of rainfall, and even in the deserts that will comprise new wetlands. And while you are at it, know that this is the way to introduce smut into your grain crops and other disease into your garden crops. You are in a far worse position as a citizenry than you can calculate from your private veranda. Now that, however, is not the peculiarity of Jewish landlords alone. Gentile landlords have played the same trick. But landlordism is peculiarly a Jewish ambition and distinction. The Jew is the landlord of America. And any group of tenants, almost anywhere in America except the West, could testify to this. Nor is landlordism itself reprehensible, things being what they are, unless it is antisocial and anti-American. In the kill box, Hatton states, "Now, since war and killing is American, and nothing seems to be considered within the country anti-American, you don't have any recourse, do you, citizen?" And just here is where it gets pointed. Some of the oldest and more sacred shrines of Americanism in the East have entirely lost their character as such by the invasion, not of foreigners, but of Jews. And the more that one sees of this invasion, the more one utterly distrusts the statistics given out by Jews as to the Jewish population of the United States. In the kill box, Hatton speaks, "Please realize that while your administration and Congress argue and fling hatchets and rattle sabers over Iraq, every day thousands of people from Israel are pouring into the United States and are and will be considered refugees eligible for permanent citizen status. I've told you many, many times, most of the Israelites are here. Even some of the Jewish people that are trying to live a better life, actually, and still do devious things. They all live here. Osama bin Laden, he lives here. And if you don't think Zelensky doesn't live here, then you're all nuts. It's true. It's true. Now, this non-war is going to be the basis of terror against the Jews, and everyone who wishes to immigrate and some who do not will be reestablished for USC by the controllers, wherever they are sent to relocate. Now, this is a major part of the plan, for this is part of the non-war. And do you know that the one nationality on which the government of the United States is stopped from asking questions, either for immigration or census statistics, is the Jewish? Do you know that when the government of the United States wants to know anything about the Jews, it must go to statisticians, which the Jews themselves support in the kill box, Hatton. And just as the polls of today, the numbers come out any way they wish. So if a nation claims that it is no nation with respect to the United States government, as the Jews claim, and has no national statistics which it will permit the government to collect in the official way, so why should it treat itself as a nation and keep its own records, right? Well, the Jews of the United States, like the Jews of every European country, are a nation among themselves, with their own government, their own policies, their own records, and the United States government does business with the Jewish government in America through chosen Jews. No doubt of that. It is, however, a digression. The matter of Jewish statistics will come up again. And in the meantime, a glance at the rapid changing of so many American cities in all parts of the land leads to the belief that the Jewish statistics furnished by the Jews for Gentile consumption entirely misstate the facts, and this belief is strengthened by the knowledge and the statistics given by the Jews for Jewish consumption are very different from those supplied for the outside world. Now, landlordism may be explained by the inclination of the Jew toward speculation, and we know that real estate has been made one of the most speculative of occupations. So landlordism may be explained by the inclination of the Jew toward speculation, and we know that real estate has been made one of the most speculative of occupations, disgracefully, most disastrously so. The Jew cannot be condemned for becoming a landlord, for becoming the most conspicuous landlord in America, and he cannot be condemned apart from his Gentile co-offenders for the abuse he has made on his advantage as landlord. But it is a matter for American concern that the cities to which in the school books our children are taught to look as the birthplaces of liberty, and as still the spokesman of Americanism, should become Semitic cities, financially and politically, and the recruiting grounds of the world's Bolshevism. Until recently, however, the Jew in America has not cared for the land. It is a characteristic. The Jew is not an agriculturist. Lavish fortunes have been expended to make him so, but the productive work of farming has not had and does not now have any appeal to him. His choice in land is this: land that produces gold from the mine, and land that produces rents. Land that produces more potatoes and wheat has not directly interested him. In the kill box, Hatton, forget that in these days of the 90s, you will find big business, Jewish big business, behind all those farms now. And the little farmers taken out in corporations such as Archer Daniels Midland will control the crops, purchase of crops, sale of crops, and the decision as to what lands can be used, funneled right through your government halls of injustice. And if lucky, a farmer might get an opportunity to operate his little farm, but usually it's far easier and less noticed if the farms are taken, merged into a conglomerate, and operated with massive equipment, low-wage immigrant farmers and the home site either demolished or leased to the operating manager. And I will take up this subject again later where it is better seen and understood. Right here in this area, in this year, there's massive flooding problem, and hundreds of acres are lost which were already growing major crops of organic crops. This is massively expensive to both the grower and the landowners. And yes, indeed, our local farm plot had water standing and running through and within the fields, but I asked that a crop not be planted in the fall last. You listen to the reports and you do not plant if you know El Nino is hovering off the coast. So our land is dormant, waiting, tilling for spring crops, which will this year be used by a major organic grower to make up for some of his lost acreage. Now, you have to understand that these large growers already have commitments for their crops before planting. So it's a big part of the game and officious market options and commodities game. Now, this does not mean, however, that the lease for land will not cover the lease of the farm. So it doesn't work out fairly, but it does save the cost of losing crop and seed. And for a year, we will have about the only storage spelt around the country in our little bins, which would have had to go for planting and loss. So the farm is the least of our problems, but gets to come back into being one of the biggest problems to the NC gang. Now, the equipment was vandalized, and witnesses say it was by them. The landlord left equipment on the property that Mr. NC took unlawfully and in fact sold. The landlord is very, very upset now because he had use for the equipment to lease to growers. He just discovered this major inconvenience, which negates the statute of limitations on his prior actions regarding that farm. At any rate, since the vandalizing of the tractors and the crop equipment, the working of the land needs more equipment, so the best option is to leave the land this year to people with massive equipment, and let's see if Mr. NC wants to dink around with them. Now, for you inquiring minds who are reminded of the extra ongoing saga, their lawyers are working as we write on fundamental information about the program which was run last spring. It seems the NCs, Fort, Beam, Tootin, and George Green with attorneys were the culprits who fed the program directors and producers the false information. Now, NC even went on air in shadow disguise stating Eckers and the Institute have an arsenal of weapons and tons of ammunition stashed at the farm yet. Now, Extra says they won't sit still for that kind of trashing of what they like to consider a clean magazine type of television, international programming. But it is true, of course, that the land question has been distinctly Jewish in countries like Poland and Romania, and no law against Jews owning land in those countries has ever been effective in preventing their control of whole provinces. Not that the Jews demanded the right to farm the land, their choice was to farm the farmers. By devious methods and the use of Gentile fronts, they could always secure control of the land, and thus dominating the peasants, they could create almost any condition they wished. And this is what they actually did. That is the Jewish question in those parts of the world. Not for farming purposes, it must be understood, but for the purpose of controlling the main source of wealth in agricultural countries and for taking the control of the people away from their natural Gentile leaders. Now, these two things always go together in countries where there is intellectual or landed aristocracy to which the people look for leadership. The Jewish program is to destroy that leadership by gaining control of the land. It is profitable, of course, but when you survey the outworking of the plan, you always see something other than the profits involved. The consummate perfection of the Jewish plan for world control is that it does not involve sacrifice as have other plans. It is immensely profitable at every stage, and the greater the profitableness, the more surely the purpose is being achieved. So in America, there is no aristocracy to be cut under by the gaining of land control. Jewish activity in the United States until recently has confined itself to the control of land products after they have been produced. That is, so to say, Jewish interests do not engage in trapping, but they control the fur trade. Speaking of furs, it is very funny to see how many affairs turn out. During the war, there was a great to-do made about the German control of the American fur trade. And it was true that the fur trade was controlled from Germany, but not by Germans, but by Jews. And then a great to-do was made about seizing, confiscating, and absolutely selling out that German fur business to Americans. And the Americans who bought it were Jews. The actual control has never changed. The profits still find their way to the international purse. But furs is just an example. Jewish interests do not engage in raising grain, but control the grain that others produce. And the need of the United States is a who's who of Jewish financiers, that the people may identify the men about women they read as having made this corner or sprung that coup. These interests, which have simply grabbed American-produced wealth and made American consumers pay and pay and pay, have been able to operate almost openly as they read their newspapers. And of course, while the American newspaper will gladly inform you that this man is an Italian and that man a Pole and the other man a Briton, it will never tell you that the fourth man is a Jew. There is a Jewish organization in every city, large and small, to prevent it. And they prevent it by methods that are violent and wholly subversive of the American ideal of liberty. So until recently, the plan in the United States has been to seize the commodity at just that point in its passage from producer to consumer, where the heaviest weight of the profit can be extracted from it, at the neck of the bottle, so to speak, and control it there. It is not service that the people pay for. They pay for seizure. But a new movement has begun in the United States. Jewish millions are now being used to secure immense tracts of American lands. Formerly, it was enough to control the cotton as the bread was controlled, but now the movement is toward controlling the cotton fields. The operations are carefully guarded. Gentile fronts are used almost exclusively, but follow the trail through all the blinds and false scents, and you come at last to the international Jew whose throne is set up in London. Now, many Jews have written the Dearborn Independent, saying that they do not know about these racial plans for world control. And it may well be believed that they do not, but one purpose of these articles is to tell them about it. But every Jew rejoices in the movement of his people towards power. And it is this sentiment that the international Jew implicitly trusts, and because this sentiment exists, the international program secures a maximum of success at a minimum risk of exposure. Jewry is not a democracy, but an autocracy. Of course, the ordinary Jew does not know. The question is, why should he revile the Gentile who tries to tell him? If a Jew will not seal his mind against the statements made in these articles, he will find in his own knowledge sufficient corroboration of their principal features, and he will be in a better position to assist in the solution of the Jewish question. And it is with amazement at certain men's conception of editorial honesty that the Dearborn Independent has read some of the reports made of these articles. And under cover, principally of the Yiddish, alleged translations of these articles have been flung broadcast among non-English speaking Jews, translation which not only bear no resemblance to the original, but actually insert whole paragraphs of matter which never appeared in the original at all. Is there a fear of permitting the average Jew to read this series? Nothing is more desired by those whose purpose is to lay foundations for the solution of the Jewish question in America than that every Jew in the United States should know exactly what is being printed here week by week. The Jew has been deceived by his leaders long enough, and the fact is then that there is a definite and already well-forwarded movement toward the control of the cotton lands of the United States. The first step was to depreciate the market value of these lands as much as possible. Pressure was brought through certain banks to limit cotton farmers' efforts. They were told that if they planted more acreage to cotton than they were told to, they would not be financed. Now, cotton production was to go way down, while cotton prices was to go way up, and the profits were not the farmers, but those who controlled the course of cotton from the first market to the wearer. Cotton farming was to be made less profitable. The public was being compelled to supply the money by which the Jewish controllers were to buy the land. And in brief, it was to be made more profitable to sell cotton lands than to sell the cotton. In the Kill Box, Hatton speaks, "Every farm landowner and farmer can give you better tales today about subsidies and removal of guarantees for this or that reason than I could possibly present one-on-one." So these statements are being deliberately restricted to the traffic in cotton lands. Jewish financiers in New York and London know these things, even if Jewish editors and rabbis do not. Now, these statements are being deliberately restricted to the traffic in cotton lands. Jewish financiers in New York and London know these things, even if Jewish editors and rabbis do not. This movement has been within the knowledge of certain classes of businessmen for a long time. Indeed, some have been forced by what used to be called the pressure of circumstance to serve the movement, but they were not able to interpret its meaning. It is only recently that the more important Gentile businessman of the United States has been able to interpret certain things. The war was a potent eye-opener. Now, those wonderful documents known as the Protocols, with their strong grasp of every element of life, have not overlooked land. The land program is found in the 6th Protocol, which is one of the briefest of these documents and may be quoted in full to show now the relation it bears to certain excerpts made in previous articles. So let's listen. Protocol 6. We shall soon begin to establish huge monopolies, colossal reservoirs of wealth upon which even the big Gentile properties will be dependent to such an extent that they will fail together with the government credit on the day following the political catastrophe. The economists here present must carefully weigh the significance of this combination. We must develop by every means the importance of our super government, representing it as the protector and the benefactor of all who voluntarily submit to us. The aristocracy of the Gentiles as a political force has passed away. We need not take them into consideration, but as owners of the land, they are harmful to us in that they are independent in their sources of livelihood. Therefore, at all costs, we must deprive them of their land. The best means to attain this is to increase the taxes and the mortgage indebtedness. Now, these measures will keep land ownership in a state of unconditional subordination, unable to satisfy their needs by small inheritance. The aristocrats among the Gentiles will burn themselves out rapidly. And at the same time, it is necessary to encourage trade and industry vigorously, and especially speculation, the function of which is to act as a counterpoise to industry. Without speculation, industry will cause private capital to increase and tend to improve the condition of agriculture by freeing the land from indebtedness for loans by the land banks. So it is necessary for industry to deplete the land both of labors and capital, and through speculations transfer all the money of the world into our hands, thereby throwing the Gentiles into the ranks of the proletariat. The Gentiles will then bow before us to obtain the right to existence. To destroy Gentile industry, we shall, as an incentive to this speculation, encourage among the Gentiles a strong demand for luxuries, all enticing luxuries. We will force up wages, which, however, will be of no benefit to workers, for we will at the same time cause a rise in the prices of prime necessities, pretending that this is due to the decline of agriculture and of cattle raising. And we will also artfully and deeply undermine the source of production by instilling in the workmen ideas of anarchy and encourage them in the use of alcohol, at the same time taking measure to drive all the intellectual forces of the Gentiles from the land. And that the true situation shall not be noticed by the Gentiles prematurely. We will mask it by pretending effort to serve the working class and promote great economic principles, for which an active propaganda will be carried on through our economic theories. The local and passing element in this is the aristocracy of the Gentiles. That is to say, the program is not entirely fulfilled by the passing of aristocrats. Jewry goes on just the same. Its program stretches far. Jewry will retain such kings as it desires, as long as it desires them. And probably the last throne to be vacated will be the British throne, because what to the British mind is the honor of being Jewry's protector, and therefore the inheritor of the blessing which that attitude brings, is to the Jewish mind the good fortune of being able to use a worldwide empire for the furtherance of Jewry purpose. And each has served the other, and the partnership will probably last until Jewry gets ready to throw Britain over, which Jewry can do at almost any time. There are indications that it has already started on this last task. But the permanent elements in the protocols are the land, the Jews, and the Gentiles. The word of explanation may be necessary on this inclusion of the Gentiles as permanent. The protocols do not contemplate the extermination of the Gentiles, and in the kill box, Hatton speaks just the genocide and extermination of some of the races, as in Judean, common, their description, not mine, blacks, Asians, Hispanics, and useless eaters, nor the making of this world a complete Jewish populated world. The protocols contemplate a Gentile world ruled by the Jews as master, the Gentiles as hewers of wood and drawers of water, a policy which every Old Testament reader knows to be typically Jewish and the source of divine judgment upon Israel time and time again. Owners of the land are harmful to us in that they are independent in their sources of livelihood. That is a foundation principle of the protocols. It matters not whether the owners are the Gentile aristocracy, the peasants of Poland, or the farmers of the United States. Land ownership makes the owners independent in their sources of livelihood. And any form of independence is fatal to the success of the world program, which is written so comprehensively in the protocols and which is advancing so comprehensively under Jewish guidance in the world of actual affairs today. Not tillers of the land, not dwellers of the land, not tenants, and not an agricultural peasantry, but owners of the land. This is the class singled out for attention in the sixth protocol because they are independent in their sources of livelihood. Now, there has been no time in the history of the United States when apparently it was more easy for the farmer to own his land than now. Mortgages should be a thing of the past. everywhere the propaganda of the question tells us that the farmers are growing rich, and yet there were never so many abandoned farms. Therefore, at all costs, we must deprive them of their land. How? Well, the best means to attain this is to increase the land taxes and mortgage indebtedness. Now, high taxes to keep the land at all, borrowed money to finance the tilling of it. So these measures will keep land ownership in a state of unconditional subordination. We will leave it to the farmers of the United States to say whether this is working out or not. And in the future reference to this subject, we will show that whenever an attempt is made to enable farmers to borrow money at decent rates, whenever it is proposed to lighten the burden of mortgage indebtedness on the farm, Jewish financial influence in the United States steps in to prevent it, or failing to prevent it, mess it all up in the operation. And by increasing the farmer's financial disability on one hand, and by increasing industrial allurements on the other, a very great deal is accomplished. The protocol says it is necessary for industry to deplete the land both of laborers and capital. Has that been done? Have the farms of the United States been depleted both of labor and capital? Certainly. Money is harder for the farmer to get than it is for any other man. And as for labor, he cannot get it on any terms. So what is the result of these two influences, the one working on the farm and the other in the cities? It is precisely what the protocol says it will be: increased wages that buy less of the materials of life, and we will at the same time cause a rise in the prices of prime necessities, pretending that it's due to the decline of agriculture and cattle raising. The Jew who set these protocols in order was a financier, economist, and philosopher of the first order. And he knew what he was talking about, and his operations in the ordinary world of business always indicated that he knew exactly what he was doing. How well is this sixth protocol has worked and is still working out in human affairs is before the eyes of everyone to see. Now, here in the United States, one of the most important movements toward real independence of the financial powers has been begun by the farmers. The farmer's strong advantage is that, owning the land, he is independent in his sources of livelihood. The land will feed him whether he pleases international Jewish financiers or not. His position is impregnable as long as the sun shines and the seasons roll. It was therefore necessary to do something to hinder this budding independence. So he was placed under a greater disadvantage than any other businessman in borrowing capital. And he was placed more ruthlessly than any other producer between the upper and nether stones of a thievish distribution system. Labor was drawn away from the farm, and the Jew-controlled melodrama made the farmer of a rube, a Jew-made fiction presenting him as a hick, causing his sons to be ashamed of farm life. The grain syndicates, which operate against the farmer, are Jew-controlled. There is no longer any possibility of doubting, when the facts of actual affairs are put alongside the written program, that the farmer of the United States has an interest in this question. But this is not all. Any writer who attempts fully to inform the Gentile mind on the Jewish question must often feel that the extent of the protocol's conspiracy is so great as to stagger the Gentile mind. Gentiles are not conspirators. They cannot follow a clue through long and devious and darkened channels. The elaborate completeness of the Jewish program, the perfect coordination of its mass of details, wearies the Gentile mind. Now, this reality, more than the daring of the program itself, constitutes the principal danger of the program being fulfilled. Gentile mental laziness is the most powerful ally that the world program has. That's what they think of us, folks. In the kill box, Hatton says, of course, today it is known that less than 1/5 of the population can read what is offered, and the other portion has been so pointedly and deliberately dumbed down as to cause no problem to the controllers, for pure junk is provided for the population. Controlled information, and who after all is going to read this rubbish? For example, after citing the perfectly obvious coincidence and most probable connection between the protocols and the observable facts with reference to the farm situation, the writer is compelled to say as above, but this is not all. And it is a peculiarity of Gentile psychology that the Gentile reader will feel that it ought to be all because it is so complete. And this is where the Jewish mind outmaneuvers the Gentile mind, folks. Gentiles may do a thing for one reason. The Jew often does the same thing for 3 or 4 reasons. The Gentile can understand thus far why Jewish financiers should seek control of the land in order to prevent widespread agricultural independence, which, as Protocol 6 says, would be harmful to us. That reason is perfectly clear. But there's another. It is found in the 12th Protocol, and it contemplates nothing less than the playing of city against country in the great game now being exposed. And complete control over the city by the industrial leverage and other country by the debt leverage will enable the hidden players to move first the country by saying the city demands certain things, and then move the city by saying that the country demands certain things, thus splitting citizens and farmers apart and using them against one another. Look at the plainness and the boldness, yet the calm assurance with which the plan is broached. Our calculations reach out especially into the country districts. There we must necessarily arouse those interests and ambitions for independence on the part of the provinces. It is clear that the source of this will be precisely the same, and that it will come from us. It will be necessary for us, before we have obtained full power, to so-called arrange matters, that from time to time the city shall come under the influence of opinion in the country districts, that is, of the majority prearranged by our agents. The preliminaries of the game are here set forth to jockey city and farm against each other, that in the end the conspirators may use whichever proves the stronger in putting the plan over. In Russia, both schemes have been worked, and the old regime established in the cities was persuaded to lay down power because it was made to believe that the peasants of Russia requested it. And then, when the Bolshevists seized power, they ruled the peasantry on the ground that the cities wanted it. The cities listened to the country, now the country is listening to the cities. So if you see an attempt made to divide city and farm into antagonistic camps, remember this paragraph from the 12th Protocol. Already the poison is working. Have you ever noticed the prohibition was something which the backwoods districts forced upon the cities? Have you ever heard that the high cost of living was due to extravagant profits of the farmer? Profits which he doesn't get? Well, one big dent in this program of world control could be made if the citizen and the farmer could learn each other's minds. Not through self-appointment spokesmen, but directly from each other. In the kill box, Hatton says, this, of course, is a legal restriction. Note that nobody with an attorney can even speak to one another except through these attorneys. City and farm are drifting apart because of misrepresentation of outsiders. And in the widening rift, the sinister shadow of the world program appears. So let the farmers look past the Gentile fronts in their villages or principal trading points and pass them to the real controllers who are hidden in the kill box Hatton. And 78 years later, it is too late to change this. Issue of September 4th, 1920, end of quote. I must close this as it is far too lengthy and the paper must be done today. However, with one of the most important things upon which you of the United States and the world must focus is the United Nations and the non-payment of those incredible sums of debt dues by the U.S. to that body. And you can probably now see why those are outstanding. This controls the body and determines when and if the very payment would lose control entirely. The money itself has to be loaned from the Federal Reserve, and that means from the Jewish interests. No, I don't think you understand too well, readers, even yet. And you will applaud and laud some Turner who donates $1 billion over some long period of time. Don't you understand that one donation assures him and Hanoi Jane the ability to write off 4 times that amount in one lump sum in tax savings? Yes, indeed, this Antichrist has done a super job of fooling all you people all the time. Truth can set you free, but you will find it in time to save anything. We shall see. Adonai. Oh, and if you allow it, you could literally lose your mind over this as to how these people literally sat down and put all this together and managed to play it off, and none of us the wiser. And if this doesn't piss you off, I don't know what should. We've been played. And who knows, will we be played even after President Trump is in office? Think about that, folks. How do you get rid of a disease that's been embedded forever? And it's been brought in through the generations. I mean, you can get rid of the big guys. You know, you can chop the snake's head off and all the Medusa's heads that you want. But there's still leftover fragments that are still going to be around. How do you get rid of all that? Okay, folks, share your smile and hug those that you love, because life is short. Do something kind for somebody else, because we don't know. We don't know their circumstance, and if we have the means, let us share with others, because you'll just get that back 10 times. Okay, folks. Be kind to your neighbors, even though, they're odd at times. I know I've got a lot of oddities around me, but I'm sure I'm odd to them as well. And so they are our brothers and sisters. Believe it or not, all of them, even the bad guys. Love you. See you. Bye.